Before leaving, Bryn's mother begged her not to destroy the family. She insisted parents make mistakes and claimed Bryn owed them forgiveness after everything they had done for her growing up. But for the first time in her life, Bryn saw through the guilt and manipulation clearly. She looked at both of them and said, "Parents are supposed to protect their daughter's biggest moments, not abandon her the second your favorite child calls." Her mother burst into tears while her father stayed silent, staring down at the floor because he knew she was right. Bryn admitted that what hurt most wasn't missing money or gifts, it was realizing strangers cared more about her wedding day than her own parents did. Then she picked up the framed wedding photo of Grant walking her down the aisle and quietly said, "He stepped up when you didn't." Without another word, Bryn walked out the front door while her mother cried behind her and her father still refused to look her in the eyes. Growing up, my younger brother Cade was always treated like the center of the universe while I was expected to quietly accept whatever scraps were left for me. My parents skipped my dance recital to attend one of his football practices, canceled my 16th birthday dinner because Cade wanted a weekend trip with friends, and even drained most of my college savings to help fund his failed business idea. Meanwhile, I worked exhausting late-night shifts at a diner just to afford nursing school tuition on my own. Every time I complained, my mother would sigh and tell me to be understanding because Cade was going through a hard time. But somehow, Cade's hard times always became everyone else's responsibility. Even after years of disappointment, I still convinced myself my parents would finally show up for me on the most important day of my life. I believed my wedding would be the one moment they'd choose me first. But that phone call 3 hours before the ceremony shattered the last piece of hope I had been holding on to for years. As the wedding music began, my hands trembled so badly I could barely hold my bouquet. I looked toward the front row and felt my chest tighten when I saw the 2 empty seats reserved for my parents. Guests kept glancing at them, then back at me, whispering quietly to each other. The humiliation burned through me more than I can explain. Then my phone buzzed. It was my mother. She had sent me pictures of herself and my father relaxing beside the resort pool in Cabo with drinks in their hands. Her message simply read, "We'll celebrate when we get back. Don't be dramatic." I stood there in my wedding dress trying not to cry while my own parents treated the biggest day of my life like it was some minor inconvenience. Meanwhile, my father was drinking cocktails on a beach while I prepared to walk down the aisle alone. That's when Evan's father, Grant Mercer, quietly stepped beside me. Without making a scene, he offered me his arm and softly said, "No daughter should have to do this by herself." At that moment, I nearly broke down completely. Grant proudly walked me down the aisle while every guest stood watching. And honestly, the kindness in his eyes hurt almost as much as my parents' absence because it showed me what real support was supposed to feel like. During the reception, Evan's family surrounded me with warmth, laughter, and genuine love. His mother Celeste kept checking on me, his relatives danced with me, and Grant gave a heartfelt speech about welcoming me into their family forever. In a single night, Evan's family made me feel more valued and loved than my own parents had in years. About a week after the wedding, I finally learned the real reason my parents abandoned me that day. My cousin Tessa came over one evening looking nervous, like she had been carrying a secret she couldn't hold anymore. She told me Cade had called my parents in a panic just days before the wedding because his ex-girlfriend was supposedly vacationing in Cabo with another man. He claimed he was falling apart emotionally and begged them to come support him. And they went. Not only did they choose him over me again, but they spent nearly $18,000 on luxury flights, a beachfront resort, private dinners, and excursions during the trip. Hearing that made me feel sick because just months earlier, when Evan and I were struggling to pay wedding deposits, my parents kept insisting they were financially tight. My mother even told me they couldn't contribute a single dollar toward the ceremony because money was too stressful right now. So while I cut corners on flowers, skipped my dream honeymoon, and worked overtime shifts to cover expenses, my parents were happily funding Cade's emotional vacation. What hurt most wasn't even the money. It was realizing they had never truly seen my wedding as important. To them, Cade's temporary heartbreak mattered more than one of the biggest moments of my life. The empty seats at the ceremony had already broken my heart. But learning the truth behind their decision burned even deeper because it proved their absence wasn't unavoidable. They chose not to be there. A few days after returning from Cabo, my parents acted like nothing had happened. No apology. No guilt. No acknowledgement of the pain they caused me. It was like my wedding day had been some small event they accidentally missed instead of one of the most important moments of my life. Then one afternoon, a small package arrived in the mail from my mother. For a second, I honestly thought it might be a heartfelt letter or maybe even an apology. Instead, it was a cheap souvenir magnet with a picture of a beach sunset and the words, "Greetings from Cabo." I just stared at it in disbelief while my chest tightened. That tiny magnet somehow hurt more than the empty seats at the ceremony because it showed how little they understood the damage they'd done. I finally called them that night, hoping maybe they'd realize how cruel all of this felt once they heard my voice breaking. But instead of apologizing, my father sounded irritated that I was still upset. He snapped, "Bryn, a wedding is just one day. You need to stop being so emotional about it." That sentence changed something inside me permanently. Because it wasn't just one day. It was every forgotten birthday. Every cancelled plan. Every sacrifice I made while Kate got everything handed to him. The wedding was simply the moment I finally stopped pretending things would ever change. After that call, I stopped reaching out first. I stopped texting my mother updates about my life. I stopped trying to earn love that should have been given freely in the first place. And strangely enough, for the first time in years, my parents finally noticed my silence. About 2 months after the wedding, the perfect little world my parents built around Kate finally started collapsing. One evening, my mother suddenly called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. At first, I honestly thought someone had died. But the truth was something very different. Kate had secretly maxed out multiple credit cards during the Cabo trip and hidden the debt from everyone. Luxury hotel upgrades, private yacht rentals, designer shopping, expensive bar tabs, he charged everything without thinking about consequences because he assumed someone else would clean up the mess like always. The problem was, this time the debt was massive. Debt collectors started calling my parents' house daily. Final notices piled up on their kitchen counter. My father even discovered Kate had taken out personal loans using family connections to get approved faster. And suddenly, the same parents who ignored my wedding and dismissed my pain were desperately calling me for help because I was the responsible one. My mother kept saying things like, "You've always been the strong child, and families have to stick together during hard times." But all I could think about was how nobody cared about family when I sat alone crying in my bridal suite. They expected me to step in, hand over my savings, and rescue Kate from another disaster he created himself. Just like I had spent my entire life cleaning up emotional messes nobody thanked me for. Only this time, something was different. For the first time in my life, I didn't immediately say yes. Once my parents realized I wasn't rushing in to save Kate, the pressure from the rest of the family started almost immediately. My aunt called me first, acting sweet at the beginning before suddenly saying, "Bryn, family helps family no matter what." Then my cousins started texting me about how stressed my parents were. One even implied that if something happened to my mother because of the stress, I'd regret not helping forever. It felt like everyone expected me to sacrifice myself again simply because I was the dependable daughter. Nobody asked whether I was still hurting. Nobody acknowledged what my parents had done to me just weeks earlier. Somehow, Kate's financial disaster had once again become my responsibility. My mother called almost every night crying on the phone, saying the stress was affecting her health and that my father wasn't sleeping anymore because of the debt collectors. She kept repeating things like, "We need you," as if those words alone could erase years of neglect. But every time I started feeling guilty, another memory came rushing back. I remembered standing alone in my wedding dress while my parents relaxed at a resort. I remembered crying in the bridal suite, trying to fix my makeup before walking down the aisle without them. And I remembered how easily they dismissed my pain afterward like it meant nothing. One night, after another exhausting phone call from my mother, I completely broke down in front of Evan. I admitted that part of me still wanted to save them because I had spent my whole life believing it was my job to hold the family together. But Evan looked at me quietly and said something that changed everything. "You've spent your entire life rescuing people who never protected you in return." Hearing that out loud hit me harder than I expected because deep down, I knew it was true. And for the first time in my life, I decided I wasn't going to sacrifice myself just to keep everyone else comfortable. A few days later, Grant Mercer invited me out to dinner. At first, I assumed he just wanted to check on me because he had always been kind, but that night ended up changing something deep inside me. We sat in a quiet little steakhouse near the lake while soft music played in the background. For the first time in weeks, nobody was pressuring me, blaming me, or asking me to fix another family disaster. Grant simply listened while I talked. I admitted how guilty I felt for refusing to help my parents, even after everything they had done. Part of me still feared I was somehow being selfish. Grant stayed quiet for a moment before looking directly at me and saying something I'll never forget. "The people who deserve your loyalty are the ones who stand beside you when it matters." Those words hit me harder than he probably realized. Then he reached into his jacket and handed me a small envelope. Inside were printed wedding photos I hadn't seen yet. One picture stopped me completely. It was the moment Grant walked me down the aisle. In the photo, I looked nervous and heartbroken, but Grant stood beside me with so much pride and care that it honestly looked like he had been my father my entire life. Looking at that image made my chest tighten because I suddenly realized something painful. I had spent years desperately chasing love, approval, and attention from people who were never willing to truly give it to me. Meanwhile, the people who genuinely cared about me had been quietly showing up all along. Grant gently told me that love shouldn't feel conditional or transactional. He said family isn't defined by who shares your blood, it's defined by who chooses to stand beside you when life gets hard. And sitting there holding those wedding photos, I realized he was right. About 3 weeks later, there was a sudden knock at our front door late in the evening. When I opened it, my parents were standing there looking exhausted, tense, and nothing like the carefree people from those Cabo vacation photos. My mother's eyes were swollen from crying, and my father looked older somehow, like the stress had finally caught up to him. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then my father quietly admitted they were on the verge of losing their house because of Kate's debts. Apparently, the loans were worse than anyone realized, and creditors were threatening legal action if payments weren't made soon. My mother immediately started crying again. She grabbed my hands and kept saying, "We made a mistake missing the wedding," over and over, like repeating it enough times would somehow erase the damage. But even during what was supposed to be their apology, the conversation kept circling back to money. They talked about overdue bills, about collection agencies, about how scared they were, about how Kate had disappeared for days avoiding responsibility. And eventually, my father finally said the real reason they came. "We need help, Bryn." Not once during that entire conversation did they truly ask how I had been coping emotionally after the wedding. They never asked what it felt like to stand alone in my bridal gown while they drank cocktails on a beach. They never asked how badly they had broken my trust. It was like my pain only mattered when it affected their ability to get something from me. And honestly, that realization hurt even more than the original betrayal itself. Because deep down, I started realizing they hadn't come to repair our relationship. They came because they needed saving. That night, something inside me finally snapped. Years of disappointment, rejection, and silence came pouring out all at once. I looked at my parents sitting in my living room and realized I was done protecting them from the truth. For years, I swallowed every hurt just to keep the peace in the family. I convinced myself that if I worked harder, stayed patient, and kept forgiving them, maybe one day they would finally choose me too. But they never did. So for the first time in my life, I told them everything I had buried deep inside for years. I reminded them how they skipped my nursing school graduation because Kate had a baseball tournament that same weekend. I reminded them how they forgot multiple birthdays but somehow never missed a single one of Kate's celebrations. I reminded them how I worked double shifts to survive while they emptied my college savings to rescue him from another failed dream. Then I looked directly at my father and said the words I had been holding in since my wedding day. Grant Mercer acted more like my father in 10 minutes than you have in 30 years. The entire room went silent. My mother immediately burst into tears, covering her mouth as if hearing the truth physically hurt her. But my father just sat there frozen, staring down at the floor without saying a single word. He couldn't even look me in the eyes. And honestly, that silence told me everything I needed to know. Because deep down, they both knew I was right. After that confrontation, I finally made a decision I should have made years earlier. I chose myself. For the first time in my life, I stopped prioritizing guilt over peace. I told my parents I would not be paying Kate's debts and that I needed distance from all of them for my own mental and emotional well-being. My mother cried and accused me of abandoning the family during their hardest moment, but this time, her tears didn't control me the way they used to. Because I finally understood something important: loving people shouldn't require destroying yourself to keep them comfortable. What hurt my parents most wasn't revenge or anger. It was realizing they no longer had control over me. I was no longer the quiet daughter who sacrificed everything while asking for nothing in return. I wasn't going to keep cleaning up Kate's disasters while my own pain got ignored. And strangely enough, once I stopped chasing their approval, I finally started feeling free. Meanwhile, Evan's family embraced me even more deeply after everything happened. Grant kept checking in on me regularly, and Celeste would invite me over for coffee just to make sure I was okay emotionally. There was never pressure, manipulation, or guilt attached to their kindness. They simply cared about me because they wanted to. A few months later, on our first wedding anniversary, Grant and Celeste surprised me with a small private dinner at the same venue where Evan and I got married. They recreated little details from the wedding day that had been overshadowed by my parents' betrayal: the flowers I originally wanted, my favorite music, and even the lemon cake flavor I had quietly given up to save money. At one point during dinner, Grant stood up, raised his glass, and said, "To the daughter we're grateful life brought into our family." And honestly, hearing that healed a part of me I thought would stay broken forever. A year later, I found myself sitting on the living room floor flipping through our wedding album again. But this time, the photos didn't make me cry the way they used to. For months, all I could focus on were the empty front row seats where my parents should have been sitting. Every picture felt like proof that I hadn't been important enough for them to choose me over Cade. But somewhere along the way, my perspective changed. Now, when I looked at those empty seats, I no longer saw rejection. I saw freedom. Because losing my parents' approval forced me to stop chasing love that was always conditional. It pushed me toward the people who truly valued me without making me earn it first. And out of every picture in that album, one became my absolute favorite. It was the photo of Grant Mercer walking me down the aisle. In that moment, he wasn't stepping in out of pity or obligation. He walked beside me with pride, protection, and kindness, the kind every daughter deserves on her wedding day. Looking at that picture no longer filled me with sadness. Instead, it reminded me of the exact moment my life started changing for the better. Because family isn't always the people who raise you. Sometimes, family becomes the people who choose to stand beside you when everyone else walks away. Evan, Grant, and Celeste never made me beg for love, attention, or support. They gave it freely, without conditions attached. And being part of their family taught me what real love was supposed to feel like all along. Ironically, the most painful day of my life ended up leading me to the place where I truly belonged. And in losing the people who never valued me, I finally found the people who always would. Do you think I made the right choice by finally walking away from my parents after everything they did, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments. And subscribe with notifications on if you want more emotional betrayal and revenge stories like mine.